Apparently there's a question atheists can't answer. That's the claim in the title of this video here. Now it's hard to say if that's a prescriptive can't or a descriptive can't. Maybe I'm not allowed to answer it, but I'm gonna do it anyway, because that's just how I roll. In the thumbnail, it says atheism refuted. So I suppose either the question or the inability of the atheist to answer it should show that atheism is false. So I'm looking forward to that. I think that'd be a good thing to know, if so. What else should I say here at the start? Oh, I finally had to get some baby gates for the stairs. Things are moving along. Uh-oh. Time to toddler-proof. What else? I'm procrastinating. I'd rather go outside. It's a nice day, finally. Feel like I should go out and lick a tree or something, get some nature in me. But here I am, so, might as well just go for it. Let's go for it. Come with me. We'll be through this in no time.
If you have a car and you replace the engine on it, is it still the same car?
Legally, probably. I don't really know how that's defined. It would still have the same VIN, right? So you would register it as the same car. But then again, you could interpret the engine as the primary component of the car. It's producing the power, it's doing all the active work. If you have an engine, you have a very useful internal combustion machine. But if you have everything else and no engine, you have a big paperweight. Or maybe a carriage at best. You could hook up a horse to the front of it. That's not typically how it would be looked at, but it's valid enough. It's kind of similar to how guns are actually treated. You can take everything off the gun, take just the lower receiver, put it in your luggage, go to the airport, and you're going to have to declare to them that you're traveling with a firearm just the same as if you were traveling with the full firearm. The part that's made to contain all the important bits that make the device actually function as intended is legally considered to be the device itself. You could define a car similarly. You could say the car legally is the engine block. It's no more or less wrong than saying the frame is the car. It's all a matter of convention.
Most people would say yes, it is the same car.
Yeah, you're right. That's the convention part. Most people would say yes. We have a pretty good general agreement on what words mean. You can always find edge cases, of course, where you take a lot off the car or replace a lot of the car, and people start to disagree about whether it actually is the same car, because broad strokes linguistic conventions aren't meant to address absolutely every possible case. The point of words is not to be exactly perfectly precise in all communication you ever engage in. That's not practical, but most of the time it's good enough that people know basically what you're talking about.
Most people would say yes, it is the same car, since it generally has all the same parts.
Yeah, but that's not really true, is it? I mean, by replacing the engine, you haven't replaced one part. You've replaced hundreds of parts. And again, this is where linguistic convention comes in. Sure, you can refer to the engine as one part, but you can also refer to it as a massive collection of parts. Who's right? Whoever wins the boxing match, I guess. Settle that however you want. These definitions only really matter to us in terms of how we talk to each other. They don't say anything real about the car.
But is it the same car if you replace the frame also?
Well, then a lot of people would say no. Of course, the more of the car you replace, the more likely you are to get someone saying, no, I don't think so anymore. But there's unlikely to be a clear line where that happens. You're talking about very rapid, essentially instantaneous, large replacements. Swap out the entire engine at once, the entire frame at once. Changes of that scale are going to switch a lot of people from yes, it's the same car to no, it's not, all at once. But if you did it more gradually, and say replaced one wire at a time, one bolt at a time, one piece of the frame at a time, you would gradually get people switching over to no, it's not the same car anymore. But it would be much more inconsistent where that point was. The problem is, the language doesn't have the incredibly strict definitional granularity that would be needed for it to be totally clear where the yes ends and the no begins. And although that's what's causing the confusion in this case, it's not a problem with the language. The language doesn't need that. It wouldn't benefit from it at all. That level of rigor is way too intense for casual use. If anything, it'd be a lot more sensible to talk about this in terms of percentage of parts retained from the original car, or something like that. Maybe even by weight or volume or however you wanted to do it. But do it in some way where you can make it clear that it's some percentage original and some percentage not, and that's actually good enough, I would say. At that point, you don't really need a hard line where yes becomes no, leaving no middle ground, because you've already described the state of things sufficiently to understand them.
At this point, you might be skeptical because the frame is an essential piece to this individual car.
Well, according to you, sure. But defining it that way is not some sort of objective necessity. It's a matter of preference. You could just as well say, look, I have this car, I've had it since I was 18, I have a huge sentimental attachment to it, but the frame is broken. take it, replace the frame with a new one, and then put everything else back exactly the way it was. The engine, the doors, the panels, all the interior stuff, the tape deck. Make it look the same, run the same, sound the same, feel the same inside. It even smells the same, you dirty bastard. You might say, this is still my car I've had since I was 18. I had to replace the frame, but it's still my car. Somebody might gainsay it, but are they more right than you are, really? Hell, maybe everyone says you're wrong. Maybe there's some linguistic convention that everyone is using except for you that says that's not the case, that's not the same car anymore. Okay, well then, according to that convention, you're wrong, but the convention isn't some kind of universal truth. It's a human idea just like yours is.
But you might be able to get around this and say that it's still the same car, since it has most of its internal parts as the same.
Sure, define it that way, and then according to that definition, you're correct. And according to a different one, you're not. This is not unusual. This happens all the time. Conflicting definitions, conflicting interpretations. This is pretty normal, and it's where a lot of pretty pointless disagreements come from.
But what if you replace practically all the parts, internally and externally, besides maybe one or two?
Then you're going to get quite a lot of people saying it's a different car. Of course, if you want to complete the ship of Theseus, you have to actually replace those last one or two parts as well, and then ask people. And then it's going to depend on where they put their priorities. In defining whether it's the same car, do they prioritize whether continuity was maintained in the replacement of the parts? Or do they prioritize whether the parts themselves are the same? Maybe whether the car meets some sort of a threshold of number of parts that are the same? Or are they a philosophy type and say these labeling issues are all a matter of how you look at things and they don't really say anything real? And that'd be my position because it's actually correct. You can look at things from one direction and see them one way, and look at them from a different direction and see them a different way. And it's not surprising that you can do this. Nor, unfortunately, is it surprising that some people get really hung up on the idea that you have to only ever look at things from one direction, and then insist that everyone else is objectively wrong on their subjective choice of direction.
At this point, it becomes quite self-evident that this is an entirely different car to what it was before, since all its essential parts are completely different.
Case in point, I guess. Hey guys, the answer to the ship of Theseus problem is self-evident. The correct answer is B. Finally, it's settled.
Now, why does this explanation matter?
It doesn't really, because you're about to repeat essentially the exact same thing using the human body, and you could have saved us all some time by just starting with that, because talking about the car doesn't really establish anything that talking about the body doesn't.
Well, this same concept of parts being changed happens within every single human being at every second of the day.
Sort of. This direct swapping out gets a little bit more complicated in the human body. It's not all like that. For example, if we think about the replacement of cells, that doesn't consist of the swapping in of some new cell from an outside source. There's a continuous biological process happening. Now sure, matter comes in and out of the body all the time. We drink water, we eat food, we breathe in and out, we excrete waste. There's trillions of atoms coming in or going out regularly, going in and out of ourselves and our cells. But that's a very different situation from replacing a part of a car. The analogy to something like that would be more like an organ transplant. One part being removed and another being immediately put in its place. But that's not the norm of how a biological system functions.
And it specifically has to do with the cells that make up our entire body. As one study finds, about 330 billion cells are replaced daily, equivalent to about 1% of all our cells. In 80 to 100 days, 30 trillion will have replenished, the equivalent of a new you.
Well, in terms of raw numbers, sure, maybe. If you have about 30 trillion cells and 30 trillion are replaced, that's the numerical equivalent. The vast majority of those cells being replaced are going to be blood cells, which in the car analogy is probably akin to changing the oil or maybe the gasoline, and most of the rest are gut cells. Just because the numbers are similar doesn't mean this is the replacement of every cell in your body. I don't know if you think that or not, I'm just saying that to be clear. There are many cells that are not replaced, either within this 80 to 100 day time frame or at all, which is what it says in your source, which is a Scientific American article from 2021. Here's the quote you showed, and here's the graphic that immediately follows it. It says, large cells tend to live long, so daily turnover is dominated by plentiful small cells with very short lifespans. And then it shows a few different types of cells, one of them being muscle cells, with a lifespan of 30 to 70 years. And below that, it says, many cells in the heart, eyes, and brain last a lifetime, which is correct. You are not totally replaced. And in fact, the brain cells, which are probably the most essential piece, to borrow your language, that people would take to define us as people, are almost entirely never replaced. Sure, matter goes in and out of them to keep them running, but the cells themselves are not replaced over a lifetime. Replacement only really occurs in the hippocampus, which is a fraction of a percent of your total neurons. And my understanding for why this happens at all is that that area is important for memory and learning, and without that turnover, you would lose plasticity there, and the efficiency of those processes would be reduced.
This essentially means that the matter that makes up your body, that is your cells, are almost entirely different to the matter or cells that made up your body when you were born.
If instead of quote mining the article you took this from, you read it instead, you would see that's not the case. This is a very popular and persistent myth. And in your case, you really don't have an excuse for believing this, because the reality was directly presented to you, and the quote you mined doesn't actually even say it. Now, after you're conceived, of course you grow by cell division, mitosis. That's how you go from being a fertilized egg all the way to being a baby. And after you're born, this proliferation of your cells continues to be a primary way that you grow. Your cells keep dividing and the overall population of cells in your body increases. But as you approach adulthood, that cell division settles down. The populations become a lot more fixed. And from there, your growth tends to rely more on the increase of the size of cells, more so than on cell division. There still is some cell division, some formation of new cells, but in a large amount of your body, it becomes very slow. Again, we'll go with your article here. It says fat cells last an average of 12 years, muscle cells an average of 50 years, heart, eyes, brain, there's essentially no cell replacement. Your article gives you a nice little graphic here where it shows that almost everything being replaced are blood cells with a little bit of gastrointestinal lining, a teeny tiny bit of skin, but still an enormous amount of replacement compared to everything else, a little bit of lung tissue, and everything else is in this one tiny circle. So yeah, this just doesn't happen the way people say it does.
Now, as we said, a car in which practically all its parts are completely replaced would thus become a new or different car.
Yes, we're just totally agreeing to one interpretation of the ship of Theseus with no debate. It's obvious who's correct here. Why are people arguing about this?
But what follows from this is that if practically all our cells in our body become replaced, then we would be an entirely different person or human being than the one to which we were when we were born.
Wow, what a revelation this would be if I read it in a third grade pop science book about 500 incredible facts about your body. But I think we're both a little bit beyond that, aren't we? Now, as I said, this supposed fact is not a fact, especially not about your brain, which is the most important part with regard to the argument you're about to make. But if it were, what would the contention be? Organisms change over time. You're different when you're 90 than when you're 0. I have to reconsider everything now.
Now, of course, this view only holds true under an atheistic, naturalist view of reality.
Well, no, actually, it doesn't hold true under that because what you said is false. But I'm pretty sure what you're trying to say, though, is that a human is defined by the cells in the body, and if you replace all the cells, you've replaced the human. Of course, that would rely on an interpretation of biology that you don't have to hold. You're dealing with a continuous biological system. If you'd been correct before, and you did in fact swap out every single cell over your lifetime, you don't actually have to interpret that as you're now a totally different person. Like sure, if you compare the end state to the beginning state, it's entirely different, but the cells are descendants of the same original gamete. They're part of the same population, part of the same biological system. It's entirely legitimate to categorize that as the same organism. There's no reason that's false. From the perspective of descent, it's entirely true. And, of course, the end state and the beginning state might seem radically different, but what about the state of the system from one nanosecond to the next? Well, in that case, it's going to be almost identical. And that goes for the next nanosecond step, and the next one, and the next one, all the way from the beginning to the end. At every step, that organism was almost identical. There's a very clear continuity there. There's nothing conceptually confusing about this. Now, of course, equally, if you had not completely misrepresented what was written in that article, and all of your cells were in fact replaced over your lifetime, it would also be legitimate to say the end state of this system, prior to death, is that the existing cells are all different cells from the original state. And it's valid enough to say that in that sense, yes, it is an entirely different organism. That's not wrong either. You're just thinking about a different aspect of the same thing. You don't have to declare one right and one wrong. It's not a true or false thing like that. Again, it's a matter of how you're looking at it.
This view only holds true under an atheistic, naturalist view of reality, in which mankind does not have souls which are immaterial.
Right, so as in if you acknowledge that the person is the body, as opposed to the body being some kind of a vessel for some immaterial thing beyond the body. Well, sure, if you divorce personhood from physical reality, or I would say reality, then you can just say it's the same person the whole time regardless of anything physical that happens, to the point that even death isn't enough to stop it. Why should a few cells being replaced be a problem? Great, well, that's not very compelling to me, but I don't have to believe it.
For the atheist in this paradigm, the world is just made up of matter. There is no soul and no God. But the absurdities of this position begin to arise, such as we have just covered. For the atheist would have to say that we are a different human being from when we were born.
Well, biologically, that's obviously not the case. You Googled for a quote mine without reading anything else, so you have no idea, apparently, that you're just talking a bunch of crap. And for some reason, apparently, you just expect everyone to go along with your interpretation of the ship of Theseus paradox and your idea about what our conventions should be regarding identity, which is far from given and nobody granted that. I don't have to say anything. You're assigning me a bunch of ideas and insisting on the truth of a bunch of scientific nonsense that I don't grant. Sorry, but I reject every one of these premises, and I resent you trying to tell me what I have to think or say about them. I don't share your opinion on any of this, and I don't have to spout your opinion on it. Having said that, though, I have no problem saying that when you're old, you are a different person in some meaningful way from when you're young, with or without total cellular replacement. It's similar to how I don't have a problem talking about a population of animals being a different species from its ancestor population, despite the clear biological continuity leading from one to the other, where all offspring are clearly the same species as their parents. At some point, after enough time elapses in a gradual process of change, you can reasonably look at the state of things at two distant points in time and say these are obviously different. Things have drastically changed. They have. The old man doesn't think the same as the baby. He doesn't act the same, he doesn't look the same. You would have no idea that he was the same cellular population, starting from that same gamete, unless somebody told you. He's changed to the point where what he shares with his baby self is indiscernible without complicated scientific analysis. And that's what life is. It's change. To live is to change. To object to this is to object to life itself. Without change, nothing lives. With or without a soul, by the way. Christians might believe that a soul has a definite identity, but they don't believe it's unchanging. They believe the soul goes through a journey of change. That's part of why we're here. Your soul is here to change and grow and turn to God. And just as I would be willing to say that in the mental and even largely in the physical sense, the old man is someone different from the baby, a Christian could too. They would just say that the mental changes occurred within the soul rather than within the brain. And the existence of the soul, but not its state, was constant. The state of things in the soul is always changing from a Christian perspective. Bad mood, good mood, happy, sad, whatever it is. They just for some reason feel the need to tie all these various states together with a bow in one mysterious immaterial object called the soul that I guess has the benefit of sparing you 5 seconds of deciding how you're going to speak contextually about identity, which doesn't strike me as adding a whole lot. It's already not complicated.
The reason this holds true is that there is no consistency of personhood in a materialistic worldview in which all our parts are completely different. For just as I am a different individual human being to my father, I would also be a different individual human than the one I was just a few years ago, since practically all my cells would be replaced.
For such a long clip, I feel like I should have more to say about this, but I don't. I think I've already covered pretty much all of that. You just keep talking about this stuff as if everyone else has to work from your perspective on it, and that's not the case. And what does it matter anyway? If this were the fact, if there were no consistency of personhood in any sense, then that would be the reality you would have to deal with. This would then amount to you just complaining that you don't like reality. But I don't think reality cares.
Now, a bunch of more absurdities arise. For example, if you committed a crime like murder a decade ago, then the human being who you were a decade ago would be guilty of the crime. But you wouldn't be now since you are a completely new human being.
Okay, well, pretty much all of your neurons are still intact from back then. That's the actual reality, so none of this matters. But assuming they all did get replaced, there's still biological and structural continuity there. Your brain still preserves memory of experience, personality still has persistence, regardless of how it works, regardless of what happens to your cells, regardless of how rapidly they do or don't get replaced. This is observable reality. Your brain does in fact preserve these things, and it's very good at it. And And if you did somehow manage to change your entire personality through cell replacement or some less ridiculously convoluted method, such that you no longer have any desire for or propensity for these kind of crimes, that doesn't mean anyone else knows that. They don't know these deep biological facts about you. At least not currently. Maybe at some point in the future that kind of thing will be feasible. But that's not the way things are now. Currently, all people know is that you're a continuous biological system with the one that caused that thing that they really don't want to happen. And presumably, that there's no known way that your neurological structure has changed sufficiently to guarantee that that demonstrated propensity is gone. And so there doesn't seem to be much option other than to ensure that you're not able to do it, whether you want to or not. There's no absurdity here. This is an entirely reasonable approach, even under the untrue conditions you propose.
To give an analogy using our car example, say there is a car that hit and killed a person a decade ago.
The car did it, Your Honor. I was just inside of it, holding the wheel and pressing the gas pedal.
But over time, you replaced almost every single part of the car, such that it is a new car now. Well, you couldn't say that it hit and killed that person, since it is a new car with new parts.
Seriously, is the car on trial? What the hell are you talking about? We don't need to determine if the car is guilty or not. Look, a better analogy would be, imagine if you had a self-driving car and it hit somebody, and the question under discussion is, what is the risk of this self-driving computer and software to the public? Now, let's try to make this as analogous to a human brain as possible. So this self-driving software takes input from the world around it and gradually integrates it into its own understanding of the world. And since we're talking about replacing neurons too, maybe the computer hardware itself changes slightly over time. One transistor duplicates itself and the new one takes the place of the old one. And this happens occasionally, and maybe by now they've all replaced themselves. But the replacements are direct, essentially identical descendants. But since the accident, it has not received some kind of major software or hardware update. Neither its memory or its programming has been wiped or tampered with in any way. It's just been going through 10 years of absorbing input from around it, with whatever results that had. We don't know what they are. All we know is there's been no major externally imposed known change. And the question is, if this car has a known propensity for running people over, do we put it back on the road? Now, of course, whether your answer is yes or no is going to depend on the particulars of what happened, but the point is that you can entirely coherently consider the question. It's not at all some impossibility or absurdity. You're taking a simple issue and trying to manufacture an impossible conundrum out of it.
Or take another absurdity in regards to marriage. For if you got married to someone a decade ago, then they wouldn't really necessarily still be married to you. For the person or human being they married is completely different to you.
And here's an example where mere mental change is a lot more important of an issue than neuron replacement, and obviously far more important than, say, gut lining replacement, which is not relevant at all. Obviously, mental changes will be a result of neurological ones, but the details of that are not known. You can't see it happening. That's not accessible information, and that's not how people are making decisions in relationships. The output of that is what's experienced. When people get married, they can be super on the same wavelength and everything's great, and over time they can change mentally, sometimes drastically, in personality or just in what ideas they hold or all kinds of different ways, and maybe people feel like they don't even know the person they married anymore. Regardless of whether the person is physically the same entity, it doesn't matter how you define that because that's not the point. Mentally, the person is so different as to be unrecognizable, and then people drift apart or worse. And they're not doing that because, hey, your neurons are different. If all the neurons were swapped out, but the entire brain structure remained the same and everything functioned the same, the mental activity, the personality, nothing would change from the perspective of either party involved. They wouldn't even know it happened. This biological base layer is simply not what people care about. They care about the results. If these two biological organisms continue to have the same orientation towards one another mentally, regardless of the biological underpinnings of that, then great, things are great. And if not, then not. This is the case regardless of whether your personality is based in the brain or in the soul, because that's just talking about the foundation upon which the mental phenomenon is based. But the phenomenon as experienced is as it is in both cases.
Fundamentally, these are the practical absurdities of holding to the materialistic view of reality. For reality itself seems to break down into meaninglessness.
Reality breaks down into meaninglessness. Was that even supposed to be established by your examples? I have no idea how you think that follows. Your examples didn't seem related to that issue.
Nevertheless, this is contrary to our natural intuitions.
Oh, I don't feel like I'm biological, so I'm not. So?
And it is fundamentally contrary to the true view of reality, which is that we as human beings are endowed with rational souls that are immaterial.
Yes, I know you don't believe the human mind is biological. This is not surprising.
From the moment of conception, the present moment now, and in the future, we are the same one person due to our rational soul, which does not get replaced or gets faded away like dust.
Now I get to hear all about your religious opinions. How fun. What will be the use of this? What will this establish? How will this help you to refute atheism?
For our soul possesses our faculties of our intellect and our will, and its conjoining to the body allows for us to be truly a human person. Now, not only can the soul be demonstrated to exist from sacred scripture,
Just read the Bible, bro. Atheism refuted.
but it can also be shown to be true from human reason, as I have covered in greater detail in other videos.
I think I'll stick with this one for now, but thank you for mentioning it. I'm perfectly happy not to have to bother with this.
But to briefly sum up the argument,
Oh, god damn it.
knowledge, or even truth taken in the abstract sense, is not limited to the here and now. It is universal in itself.
Okay, so there are universal truths. I would personally say that humans just jam things into categories. We slap labels on stuff. I think we're categorization machines. I think that's a big component of our symbolic thinking, and thus language. In fact, it's necessary for language, and I think it's a big reason why we're so successful. I think it's a very useful skill. But I think that says something about us, not so much about reality outside of us. And of course I know that you, video guy, are going to disagree with this. Which, yeah, we disagree on most things like this, I would imagine. That's fine, but I don't accept your premise. I'll also say the way that this is phrased is very odd. Like, I could accept you saying knowledge about universals is possible, something like this. But what you said was knowledge is universal in itself. Now, I think this is a very weird, philosophically alien view of knowledge, and I don't really want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I think it's enough to say that I'm not with you on it.
But universals are immaterial. For if our idea of universals were material, they would be limited to the here and now and wouldn't really be universal. Thus, our knowledge of universals necessarily would have to be immaterial.
Okay, well, again, I don't think universals are a thing. I think they're a human idea. I don't think they're out there, I think they're in here. And in here is a physical thing processing its experiences. And I see no reason why a physical basis of human thought would somehow prevent you from thinking about the past or the future or categorizing anything. Like, sure, your brain is located in the here and now. That says nothing about the information it can process. You're acting as if there's an obvious link there that isn't there. Or if there is, you didn't present it. There's also no reason presented here why an idea about an immaterial thing would itself have to have an immaterial basis. This is based in a very odd idea about how the mind works, which to me sounds like it might as well come from the Andromeda Galaxy or something, for how down-to-earth and relatable it sounds. Where to have knowledge or ideas about universals, you have to share the universalness in your mind. Of the chasms between the thought processes of different people that I sometimes talk about, this is a pretty huge one. This is a gap that is not going to be bridged here.
But immateriality can only be understood through an intellect that is immaterial, lest the universal become particular and limited to the here and now.
Lest it become particular. Well, what if I told you that I think that what you call a universal is just humans looking at particulars, and then with a bunch of muddy, imprecise neurological heuristics developed for survival, and through survival, perceiving and acting towards them as if they're kind of the same thing. And then, of course, as an extension of that, talking and thinking about them as if they are. I don't really think there's anything more to it than that. It's material brains organizing the perception of material reality to survive. Look, basically all this is you telling me some philosophical ideas you have, and then telling me that those ideas must be true lest these consequences happen. Consequences that I don't care about, and what I care about doesn't affect reality anyway. Look, it's fine enough that you tell me what you think. I don't mind that, just don't expect me to go along with it. And don't expect reality to, either. If reality is as you say, then great for you. But if it's not, then saying it is isn't gonna make it so. And what I mean is, this video is supposed to refute atheism, or in this case, I guess the non-existence of the soul, which is not the same thing as atheism. There are atheists who believe in souls. There are ones who accept everything you just said. But for those who don't already accept the immaterial soul, this requires them to accept a bunch of premises based on a bunch of other immaterial stuff that they're far from guaranteed to accept and, in fact, most likely to reject. It probably is not going to be compelling to those people. It comes off a little like preaching to the choir, which, you know, that's fine, I guess. I preach to the choir too sometimes. Maybe a lot, even.
And therefore, we have an immaterial soul.
That's cool, thanks for sharing. I don't accept a single part of that argument, so for me personally, it doesn't do a whole lot.
The atheistic worldview can simply not account for the human person.
By which apparently you mean a soul. Well, of course, as I say, there are atheists out there who will make exactly that argument you just made for a soul. And that's because there is no the atheistic worldview. What you mean is materialist or something like this. And if anything, it's not so much that that can't account for the human person, as that it views the human person in a way that you find unpalatable, which is an opinion that you're welcome to.
Their vain ways of thinking lead to absurd conclusions that would lead to the destruction of duties and obligations, and even society itself.
From over here, that sounds like a fantasy you're coming up with to put your own viewpoint on a pedestal in your own imagination. You want the acknowledgement of the physical reality of humanity to be tantamount to the denial of humanity itself, and it's not.
Even if you appealed to the vague notion of your conscience, it would only be an illusion.
Appeal to it for what? Why are we talking about the conscience now all of a sudden? This never came up so far, nor did anything where bringing up the conscience would be relevant in response. It's like you're just saying random stuff now.
It would only be an illusion, for it is founded upon your material body, which is always changing.
Okay, so is your soul. A process of feeling doesn't happen without something changing. Otherwise, everything's just frozen and nothing happens. Soul or no soul. If everything that happens as a product of change is an illusion on that basis, then everything that happens in time is an illusion.
Only under a Christian account of reality can the human person be truly understood.
Only a Christian one. Not even another one with gods and souls and everything. Nope, only this one. Oh man, this guy really wants everyone else to base their philosophical positions on his philosophical presuppositions, doesn't he? And you know, this whole video felt less like he was talking about whether things are true or false, as about how he feels about what he thinks the consequences would be. How would you even put somebody in jail? How would you have duties and obligations and societies? Aside from the fact that the answers to these questions are not exactly difficult to reach, as I explained previously, consequences you don't like don't make something false. The thumbnail said atheism refuted, not atheism complained about. Anyway, it would have been nice if you were going to base this video on a quote mine if you read a little bit further first, but you didn't. And you know what? It made it more fun for me, so I'm okay with it. Before you go, please do subscribe and like. Thank you very much. And if you like the channel, please do consider supporting. I don't take sponsorships. I rely on my supporters, and I really, really appreciate those people. Thank you very much. See you next time.